Well, welcome. Good morning from me. Thank you, Howard, for the wonderful introduction. Probably have the dubious role of being the bad guy here today. As the journalist, there's definitely some questions that still need to be addressed, and I think I was one of those people that were calling Howard as soon as I heard or I started reading my news feed on Twitter. So nowadays, the issue with journalism is that we're in this race to who gets the news first instead of who gets it right. And especially if you're looking at social media feeds, it's always who gets there first. So there's a lot of misinformation during at that time, and it's definitely an important time early in this conference, which is about business diplomacy, to address some of these issues from someone who's from the ground, who's from there, who can tell us with a little bit more nuance, some of the things that went down. So, Ekim, thank you so much for allowing me to be your interviewer today, to be the bad guy. I hope the questions are not too tough. But
thank you, Anna.
I wanted to start with, was this a classical coup?
Well, the answer is no. If you mean whether it was in the chain of command, it wasn't. Clearly, the Joint Chiefs did not participate in it. Even at gunpoint, they refused to. Although I do believe it was a serious attempt at taking over power, I think we have to see it as a criminal group that has infiltrated into the military, and not just the military, they infiltrated in a lot of state institutions, from the police to the judiciary, and they used the weapons that were bought to protect the civilians and the country against these civilians. So I believe it was a terrorist attack by a group of criminals, and definitely not something in the chain of command. So I would say it's not a classical coup attempt.
And do you believe that there is have they been identified who is behind it?
Look, let me first say, for the Americans in the room, and Howard is right, we wanted to get this sort of out of the way, address the elephant in the room, and that's why we're doing this panel. Let me just say that there's no easy way for us to explain to you what this organization that we call FETO is and how it operates. There is no real analogy that I can use to easily describe it, and there's also no sociological example of it in human history. So anything I tell you will sound a little bit fictional, something out of a Dan Brown novel. I spoke to an American analyst. He said, if what you're telling me is true, that was that evening. I think he now understands that I was telling the truth. He said, you're talking about a unique phenomenon in human history. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we're talking about. So this makes it very difficult for us to explain what happened. But I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the central nervous system of this coup attempt was masterminded and executed by this FETO group, these Fethullah Gulen followers. Of course, there are a lot of questions that remain to be answered, and I'm sure there were other groups that became involved that evening for different reasons. But the main point is that, yes, the central nervous system of this coup attempt was the FETO organization.
And of course, you've asked for the extradition of Gulen. There have to be certain conditions. You have to prove that in a court of law that there was indeed a connection there. Are you prepared? Is Turkey prepared to do that?
Well, of course we are, and I think we are doing that. There are some disagreements on how to interpret the extradition treaty. But I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a politician, and our diplomats and our politicians are very busy working on that specific issue. But let me just say, as someone who's worked here shortly after 9/11, I was a liaison fellow at the House International Relations Committee here in Congress. And I remember the psychology of the American people right after 9/11 and in the months that followed. I was working here on the Hill before, during, and after the Iraq War. And I can honestly tell you, if something like this had happened here, if American F-16s were bombing Capitol Hill, if American Special Forces were raiding the White House, trying to kill the United States president, and if in subsequent months, the person that 90%, 90 or even more, of the American people believe is responsible for this was a legal permanent resident in Turkey. I'm just pausing here for a moment, especially for the Americans in the audience. I don't think that would play out well. I think if we would start talking about legalities and technicalities, I don't think that would work very well. And I don't think it worked very well for the Taliban either when they were hosting UBL. And let me also remind you, there was no smoking gun back in 2001 after 9/11. Not one, and I know there are experts in the field present here, but I did not see a smoking gun implicating UBL in the 9/11 attacks. But we all knew he was the mastermind. And again, more than 90%, 90% of the Turkish population, including its state institutions, our military, our intelligence apparatus, that has now been cleaned from this cancer. We all agree that he was the inspiration and the mastermind, and the people who know this organization, who might not be experts on what happened on July 15th, but the people who know this organization know, and there have been dozens of books written on this, and if you would read them, most of the authors of these books have been either killed or imprisoned, but I've gone back and read up on some of them. What you will see is that it is simply impossible that followers of this organization would act without the permission and the blessing of their leader. Anyone who knows this organization knows that. So yes, there are some technical issues and legal issues and processes, and in the end it might be a court decision in the United States. But I just want especially our American friends in the room to understand that for us this is a very difficult pill to swallow. That this gentleman is living here in the Poconos Mountains, close to the heart of the United States, in comfort. He's not restricted to do anything. He can continue to give messages. He has internet access. He's being protected. And he gives orders. And there's statements that are unmistakable orders to his followers to try and kill the president still today, or maybe try a second takeover, things like that. So this is a very difficult to swallow issue for us.
I'd like to go a little bit on sort of the ramifications of this coup, or whatever we want to call it in the classical sense, into the economy in Turkey. Tell us a little bit about the aftermath.
Yeah, well, interestingly, we were all worried, of course, even after the coup attempt had been thwarted, what would happen on Monday. We expected the markets to react, of course, very negatively. But at the same time, we knew that the fundamentals of the Turkish economy were strong. So we knew we were resilient enough to weather the storm. We just didn't know how heavy the storm would be, considering the extraordinary circumstances. We were braced for the worst. Fortunately, both the markets as well as sort of the psychology of the people turned out to be even more resilient than we're used to from the Turkish people. Immediately the next day, shops were open, people were on the street, and on Monday the markets reacted very, in my view, not positively, of course, but with the reservation and the feeling of responsibility that we would like them to take. So if you look at also certain numbers like the CDS, the credit default swaps of the banks, they initially went up a little bit, but they went right back within a few months to where they were before the coup attempt. So all in all, yes, we lived through a very, very difficult episode in Turkish history, but there are a lot of positive externalities. I believe having cleaned ourselves, having saved ourselves from this particular organization, having the full concentration and the commitment of all of Turkey's institutions and civil society, with a full understanding that this organization is a very, very dangerous organization that we need to get rid of very quickly. And I realize, of course, this is not easy, and there's a lot of problems. Even today, there's a lot of reports coming in that raise certain concerns. But I think, considering what happened, we have to err on the side of caution. And I think if you think about this as an American and you empathize, you will understand. Sometimes what I use as an analogy is, you'll remember Senator McCarthy that started a witch hunt here, I believe it was in the 50s. He believed communists had infiltrated American state institutions. And he was giving out lists, and these people were actually being fired and purged from universities and government institutions and other places. A lot of careers were destroyed. Of course, that went into history as a black page in American history because he was wrong. What if he was right? What if Senator McCarthy was right? I mean, that's basically what we're experiencing. A lot of people have warned us. I was one of the people who, in my business career, ran into this organization a lot. So I started writing emails and complaint letters, and nobody was listening, very few people were listening, because what I was telling then already didn't sound very credible. So now we have the same problem trying to explain it to the world. But one thing I know about the United States, in my experience with the United States, I believe Winston Churchill also said something like, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they tried everything else. I believe at some point facts will start reaching the ground in the United States. And people on both sides of the political aisle, so whether it's the Democratic camp or the Republican camp, will start understanding that we have been telling the truth from the beginning. So I'm optimistic that we will be able to prove our point, to answer your question, and that at some point this extradition will no longer be an issue.
So it's a messaging issue, you believe, that hasn't happened yet? There hasn't been an opportunity yet to explain properly the intricacies of what's happened?
Yes, because there's a lot of material out there. There's a lot of course, activities on the ground that is ongoing. I believe initially we sent about 80 boxes to Washington, so a lot of experts are going through these boxes. My sentiment is my feeling, but again, our diplomats should answer this question, but my feeling is that slowly but surely we're proving our point.
Well, we're out of time for more questions. I wanted to just leave you with one last opportunity to tell us about the future of business diplomacy, and I think this forum is obviously where it all starts and continues, correct?
Well, let me just say, again, I'm happy we got this over with. It's not something I really liked doing, to be honest. It's a very risky topic to be addressing here, but I hope we got sort of the basics out of the way. If there are any questions about this, I'm sure our American friends will interact with us in the coming days. They can ask us. As far as Turkey's future, in terms of the business future is concerned, I believe that this particular episode, we will come out of this even stronger. I think we were infected with a disease, and we are now finally fighting it, and we will overcome this very, very strongly. Turkey will not just survive this episode, but will come out even more resilient than it ever was.
Ekim, thank you. Thanks to everyone for listening in, and Howard.
Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, now the moment.